I have two examples I want to go over today. One of them relates to using the query style instead of the method-based syntax for doing queries. And one of them relates to a problem a student brought to my attention that is possible you will run into as well. And we'll take a look at that and see how to resolve it. First of all, see how to find it. And then secondly, see how to resolve it once we found it. So start out back with our Antoso University. And if you run it, last time we looked at getting a roster this way. We'll spend a minute reviewing that. Then we'll look at getting a roster this way. In this case, I noted what I needed. All right. Well, we'll come to that. Later on. All right. So first example we looked at used the method syntax for doing this. And that involved doing this. On get async. This has to be done for just one course, so we make sure that a course ID has been passed. If it is, we are going to grab a list of courses, or we're going to grab a single course, my mistake. We're going to grab a single course, and we're going to get that from the database of courses. And we're going to filter out where the course ID equals the ID that we were passed. That way we make sure that we're getting the exact course that we want. Only one course. All right. Now, despite doing that, at the bottom we use first or default async. Actually, these are kind of redundant. I don't know why I have them both in there, but I did. Probably chuck this one out. And I would expect it to work the same. And sure enough, it does. But in addition to wanting the course, we want to fill in the department information. We want to fill in the instructor's information. We want to fill in the enrollments. And then for the enrollments, we want to fill in the student data. Look at our model. A course contains a course ID, all the general information, but it contains a department ID and a department. And it includes an enrollments list of enrollments and a list of instructors. What we're saying based on these includes is that we want to fill all those in. We don't always want to fill those in. If we're only interested in information that's contained in the course entity, we wouldn't have to do any of these includes if all we wanted were the course ID and the course name and description and so on. But we want the department, we want the list of instructors, we want the list of enrollments, so we're including them. And again, the then include means that this include refers to this. So not only are we going to fill in the courses enrollments, but for the enrollments, we're going to fill in the student information. And then give us the first or default that matches this criteria, which is like a where clause and gives us that one. Then when we display it, we simply use the dot notation for the course. We want the course department name. We want the course list of instructors. We want the course title. Then we loop through and pull up all the students. We actually loop through the instructors because an instructor, more than one instructor can be listed for a course according to the way this model is set up. All right, so what we did in the other example is we got the same data, but we took a different approach. We used the query method where our statements look more like SQL query statements. And again, when doing that, I took an inventory of what I needed. I wanted to have course name. I wanted to have the department name. I wanted to have the list of instructors for that course, and I wanted to have the list of students for that course. So what I did is, in my model, I defined the things that I wanted. A string for the course name, a string for the department name, a list of instructors, a list of students. That corresponds precisely to the description of what was on that page. The course name, department name, list of instructors, list of students. Do the same thing. I make sure that an ID has been passed. If the ID has been passed, if the ID has not been passed, that is, if it's equal to null, I return, because we can't pull up a roster if we don't know the course. I then am going to fill in course stuff and the student stuff. I'm pulling from the course table in the database. Here's my where clause. Here's what I'm selecting. I'm selecting the course title, the course department name, and the list of course instructors for that course. I then loop through this, even though I shouldn't really have to loop through this because there's only going to be one of these that match the ID. But I loop through it and I set the course name string equal to the item's title. That is the course's title. The department name to be the department name that I pull here, and the instructors to be the list of instructors that I pull related to the course that I pull. I then have a similar statement with students where I pull the student's full name by connecting the student's enrollments with the student information for that enrollment. I then, again, this will actually be a list. So I loop through and I add the student name to my list of students, which is a list of strings. And then the display is very similar. I output the course name from the model, the department name from the model. I loop through the list of instructors and display for each of them the full name. Finally, I loop through the array of students or the array of strings in the student list array and output the name of the student. I think it's easy for me to visualize this syntax. In this syntax, we're describing what we want, and we are padding out exactly what piece of information we want from it using the includes. Then we can do our filtering with it. It doesn't matter which one of these styles you use. And if you have trouble, I can give you assistance with it. Keep in mind that I did want to introduce you to both styles because, again, you could be working on a project that someone had already begun, and you might see them using one style or the other. So you should be familiar with both styles of queries. Okay, here's the next thing that we're going to do. And that is look at this problem. I have advantage that I know what the answer to this is, but I'm going to pretend that I don't know the answer. All right. So the problem is it's not storing categories. So I go in here and I register my information. Can log in. Click on Remember Me. We'll see what that does in a second. Well, that logs me in. Hello, Mike Zellers at lorainccc.edu. Now, what that Remember Me checkbox does is actually stores a cookie for this. That means if I go and run this again, I'm automatically logged on, so it still knows that it's me. So that's what that clicking that little box did. Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to add a category. I'm going to try to add a category. So I create new. Category name, breakfast. Full description, breakfast, served all day, something like that. It's good sometimes when you construct a table to sort of have a short name and a long name, because in some cases you might have space and want to display the full name, or in other cases, the short description may suffice. So I'm going to create that. And nothing happens. And to be sure, if we look at the list, it didn't save it. So, what to do? Well, my first suggestion as always is to run it through debugger. Let's look at the debugger. Let's look at this, create, and see where we're going to put our breakpoints in. So, that's in category create. And we have two. We have the on post, on get and on post async. Now remember, the on get is when the page is initially called. This will not get called when we have submitted the form. When we've submitted the form, we're submitting the form back to itself. The method is post. So, on post async is going to happen. The async method simply means that it's going to do these things and it's not going to wait around. Well, I shouldn't say that. Let's look up async. Get a better description. Kind of at a loss for words. AS. There's a full description of them here. rules in deciding whether you're going to do something synchronously or asynchronously. The operations are simple or short running. If I'm doing just a math statement, there's no need to make that asynchronous. Simplicity is more important than efficiency. The operations are primarily CPU operations instead of operations that involve extensive disk or network overhead. Now, accessing the database would suggest that database operations like this are a good candidate for async. Because an async task will continue the task instead of sitting there waiting for it to finish. So we do this update of the database. Instead, the task will continue and redirect us back to the index immediately instead of waiting for this operation to finish. And that's a good thing. Now, truth is, in our applications, it's so simple that it's not going to make a huge difference. But if you're talking about a large application with multiple users, that actually could make a difference. All right, you're going to give the user their screen back. You might do that, for example, on a site like Amazon. On Amazon, if you're posting an order, if you're placing the order, there's a lot of updating that would have to get done to their database. Well, we want to give the user their screen back so they can shop more and spend more money, right? So we're not going to sit there and wait until that update is finished. We're going to do it asynchronously. We're going to let that update run on a different thread of execution and redirect them to the continue to shop page or whatever, right? Same idea here. So that's what all this async business is. Now, if we look at this, we're adding the category to the category entity that's part of the database context, and we're saving our changes. If we looked at this code, a few things we can observe. First of all, we never did redirect back to the index page, right? When we run this and we go in to try to add a category, we never hit that code that says redirect to the page. So this code is not hit. So I'm not going to put my breakpoint there, right? Because I've pretty much concluded that that code will never be hit. It's possible that we're hitting here and something's happening, but those are async. So we're not going to sit there waiting for those to finish. At any rate, if we're not sure what to do, put the breakpoint at the very beginning of the method, right here. You notice if this if statement is true, we return the page, and we don't go and save it or redirect back to the index page. We simply return to the page that we're already on. All right, so I'm going to put my breakpoint there. And I'm going to run it. All right. What this is telling us is somehow, if this is true, if this is truly the problem, somehow there's a validation error because the model state is valid is a way to check that the validation rules have been followed. What are the validation rules? Well, all the things that you've put into the model category. Okay, so let's run this. We get here, try to enter the data, hit create. Bam, it stops right there, which is what we'd expect, right? On post async. If we interrogate this And that is, if we put our mouse over this, it tells us the value of that variable. In this case, model state invalid is, model state is valid is false. And this is saying if model state is not valid, then return page. So that's our culprit right there. The model state is not valid. That means there's a validation error. Well, let's look. By the way, this also is shown over here. Model state is valid as false. Well, let's look at the model state. There's three things that we have to validate in this. And there's one error. It shows us the three things that we are validating. 0, 1, and 2. Hard to find these little tiny check boxes. The attempted value is breakfast. Blah, 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 blah. Short description. Yep, that one's valid. It's allowing us to put that in. We can put breakfast into short description. That shows up as valid. Let's look at the other one. That is valid. We're putting in breakfast served all day into long description. Oh, that's okay. That's a string and it's a string value, so that matches. This one, however, says that category meals is null. And that it determines are invalid. All right, so what does that mean? We have to go back to the model because the model is where these validation rules live. So we look back to the model. We can stop debugging now because we probably have enough information to figure this out. We look at the model category. And it says that a model has a collection of meals associated with us. And it told us that the list of meals is null. And it's telling us that that's not valid. Why is that not valid? The way this model is written, we have not said that a null is allowable for the list of meals. So I can fix that by putting a question mark after my collection meals. That simply means that this is a nullable field. So it is possible. In fact, if you think about it, it makes sense. When we first enter in a category, initially, there's not going to be any meals associated with it. There's not going to be any meals associated with it until we start associating some meals with it. So that needs to be nullable. So even though eventually all categories should have meals associated with them, at the very start, when we first insert that category, that list of meals is going to be null. So therefore, we put the question mark and say it's nullable. We can run and debug this again. Create, we hit here. the model is valid now. In fact, we can look at that valid state, that model state in more detail. And see results view again, and see that for view sub 0, there's only 2 items in here. We're not validating to make sure that the meals are null. So there's only 2 things that we validate, and those are both true. Those are both valid. So we're pretty sure that this is valid. We can continue. Delete all breakpoints. And I'm going to step out. And there we are. It successfully added it to the list of categories and it displays. This example sort of has a short lesson and a long lesson. The short lesson is if you do something like this, to be sure, you probably have to make this nullable. Because initially, there's not going to be a list of meals associated with this category or any other sort of relationships that you have. So you probably will make this nullable. And if you get the kind of error where it's validating, check to make sure, look at your model and check to see if you have this kind of case. If it is, putting a question mark after the type means that it's allowed to be null. It should be in business. Longer lesson that I want you to learn is the idea of getting used to running things through the debugger. Now, I can understand why this would be difficult right out of the bat because it doesn't seem to like give you an error message or anything. But that's where running through the debugger, find in the code where this was called and put a breakpoint at the beginning of the function and trace through and make sure the value's equal to what you'd expect it to be. I expected this to be valid the first time through, but it wasn't. Well, then by looking at the model state in more detail, we can look at individual parts of it and determine exactly what was wrong. That's a skill that comes with time. I don't expect you guys knowing this like right off the bat. All right. However, it is a good skill to practice running things through the debugger, looking at the variables, see if you can make sense of that. And you always have me if it doesn't make sense to you. If you're running into a situation that doesn't match what you'd expect it to be, by all means, let me know, and I'll do my best to try to figure out what's going on and explain it to you. It's a systematic way of going about it rather than just staring at it and trying to figure out what's wrong and so on. Now it'll get to be where you'll recognize these errors much quicker the second or third time that they happen to you. And that again is just part of the experience. But again, until you gain that experience where some of these errors are obvious, do the work of running things through debugger and following the changes that are made. All right, let me tell you how the rest of the semester is going to pan out. It's probably good news for you. There will be no more lab assignments this semester. The rest of the semester, I want you to devote on your project. All right, I want you to do a great job on your project. As I stated before, what really makes a project better than just the run-of-the-mill average, mediocre project is you're actually doing meaningful stuff with the data. You're combining the data. You don't just have a bunch of database tables that are scaffolded that you can add stuff into, but you've shown how things are related and do something. If we were continuing this restaurant example, for example, I might come up with a menu, generate a menu, a full menu for restaurant. That is, pull all the categories, list the categories on a page, and display the meals underneath them. We've done a little bit of that with some of our assignments. We've done similar things to that, but we haven't actually done that. But again, showing a menu for a restaurant is much more meaningful than just having the entry of a category, the entry of meals, without integrating them and relating them. That's where really data becomes information, becomes something valuable when you take and you organize and you filter and you sort and you combine data from different places to come up with something that goes beyond that. So that's what I'm hoping for you on your projects. All right. So this is the last lecture in this course. That doesn't mean that I'm disappearing and going to Hawaii or something. I sure wish it did. All right, but it's not. I'm still going to be here. However, class time for the next 2 weeks will be office hours. I urge everyone to touch base with me about where your project is and be honest with me. All right. Come in during office hours via WebEx and, show me what you have so far, and I can give you some critique so that by the time you turn it in, you have a good polished project. So the next 2 weeks, no lectures. All right. Maybe you can start the Thanksgiving holiday a little bit earlier. All right. That time will be taken up by office hours. Then I urge you to touch base with me, even if you're not having problems, just to show me what you have. Now, if you have been having problems, I certainly hope that you will contact me during office hours to review and to get the answers that you need. All right. That's all I had for today. Good luck. It's been a good semester. I hope to talk with you over the next few weeks, one-on-one, through my virtual office hours.